Good morning and welcome to another episode of our Sabbath School here at Eastside SDA Fellowship. We're so glad that you can join us this morning. This morning, we are going to do our best to go into another chapter of Patriarchs and Prophets. But before we do that, we should probably take some time to get to know who's on our panel. I want to introduce to you James. James, thanks for being with us. For those of who are online who don't know who you are, James, tell us a little bit about yourself, James.
Hi guys, I'm James. I've been starting to attend Eastside for the past 2 years. I have two boys, 11 and turning 13. I live in Woodinville, and yeah, glad to be here. Happy Sabbath, everybody.
Thanks, James, and we're glad for you to be here too. And we also have Michael and Saba. I'm going to hand over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, so my name is Michael. Right now, currently a student at Seattle University School of Law. Finishing my last year, so I'll be done in next May. Just kind of, well, it's one more year left. Live in Bellevue, Washington. And yeah, just loving the PNW, so it's awesome.
Awesome. Saba?
I'm Saba. I
I'm sorry,
started,
did I pronounce it wrong?
no, you're good.
Okay.
I started attending Eastside through Michael recently. I'm a pre-dental student and I actually just submitted my application for dental school and I live in Mukilteo.
Okay. Well, if you're new to if you know Eastside as well as any of us, you'll probably know that when anyone whispers the magic word dentistry or anything to do with the dental profession, you're probably home. We have a few here at Eastside, just a few. But we wish you all the best, Michael and Saba, as you continue your studies and stuff. And I really want to say thank you so much for both of you for coming to join this conversation. We're diving into one of the exciting narratives of scripture. It's it's one of those narratives where I remember being told a lot of children's stories about it. And is it fair to say? Yeah, I think it's fair to say it was almost romanticized in the way that it was brought across. Um, I don't know if this was the same impression that you got, but as I reread this story in chapter 54 of Patriarchs and Prophets, I found that I was saddened by the end of the story. Um, and, and, and the only reason why I say that is because I really got to know Samson once more. Yes, for our viewers online and those who are listening in, we are talking about Samson, the famous judge Samson. Um, and I was saddened because I thought to myself, I guess the one thing that I did think to myself is, oh, Samson, your life could have been very different. And the reason why that resonated with me personally is because I thought to myself, oh, Sam, your life could have been very different. And it really resonated with me because I looked back at a few things in my life and a few decisions I made and a few choices that I had to make. And I thought to myself, wow, I wonder where God is leading from here on. Now, I did prepare a few questions that our panelists are going to go through, but if our panelists are getting used to me and my personality and what I'm like, I almost never stick to the script. I'm going to start with a question that's not something that I asked you outside of here. Was what were your first reflections upon reading the entire story of Samson? Specifically, did it make you think about your own life? I'm going to start with that question and leave it open. So I'm going to start with James. Would you want to fire us off? What were your first impressions as you read this story?
Yeah, well, when you grow up with these stories in church, you do take them for granted. But I was amazed at sort of the rich lessons and angles that came out of this story. Um, yeah, there's a lot to talk about, but I was most one of the things that impressed me most was just how gifted Samson was, and that I think we all have gifts. We're all given talents and gifts. Maybe some of us recognize them better than others, but certainly we can use them for our own selves or we can use them for the glory of God. That's one of the big impressions that were made on me as I read this book of Samson. But yeah, there were just a lot of rich stuff that I had overlooked over so many years.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Michael and Saba, what were your first impressions as this story washed over you guys?
For me, this was the first time I ever like heard this story. So just hearing it was, I felt like kind of sad, like about the whole story. But after reading it, I realized like that God like maneuvered through like the evil and like all the bad stuff, and like he accomplished his goal for Samson.
I'm really intrigued by hearing more, Saba. I'm sure we'll get into that because you just said that you read this for the first time, and I think you're gonna help us offer fresh eyes to this story. Thanks for sharing that, Michael. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it was interesting because when we first started, jumping into it, we pulled up to YouTube, right? And we found this like animated Samson video, and we're
Cool.
watching it, right? And it highlighted on the Delilah portion of the Samson story, but it didn't talk about anything else. And when I was watching it, I was like, yeah, like I was trying to recall like the individual events that happened. Because I remember that Samson's story was pretty violent. Like there's a lot of stuff that happened.
Sure.
And I was watching it. So we watched that animated kind of like, 5-minute clip. And then we dived into the story. And I think a couple of things. The first thing I think that really stood out to me was the connections that came out, or the life lessons that came out of the story in Samson's life, and how, like you said, the decisions he made and how that really like set himself up. So how important his decisions were in his life. And I think also just the individual events that actually occurred, from the donkey and the jawbone, right? To the foxes, lighting the foxes up.
That never got told in the children's stories, right?
Yeah, I don't remember that one. And then and then I even forgot about the whole thing where he picked up the front, right, the gate, right, and took it to the hills. So like all these different things, it just kind of was really intriguing me to see it all play out. So yeah.
Definitely. Well, let's dive in, shall we? Let's go into the narrative. We're going to do our best to cover as much of the narrative as we can. As we've just done the introduction, it's a very dense story, full of all kinds of things. But let's see if we can draw some things out. Let's start off with this. I guess the first question I want to ask in relation to the opening of the story, here's the context. The people of Israel have been at loggerheads with their enemies, the Philistines, for a very long time. And it's quite oppressive. There's all kinds of things that are going on. And it seems that the people of Israel are constantly waiting for a deliverer or deliverance to come on the horizon. And it just takes forever. They pray, they petition to God, they ask God, they beg him for some kind of relief from the oppressors, from the enemies that are surrounding them, and they simply get no response. So here's the first question I want to ask. Have you ever asked God for deliverance and heard no response? Did your relationship with God change or adapt in that time? Looking back now, would you have done or thought about anything different? I realize that's not one question, it's three, but that's where we're going to start off at the moment. Michael, I'm going to start with you. Do you want to kick us off? What are your thoughts on that particular question? Have you ever asked God for deliverance and had no response?
I think there's been multiple times in my life, sometimes where you ask God to help you through something, and it doesn't seem like there's a clear answer or a clear trajectory to where you're going after the prayer. I mean, maybe certain things, maybe deliverance of, one thing that's just popping in my mind that was in the last 3-4 years was just trying to figure out like what to do with school, where to go to school. I went, as some people in the church would know, when I finished high school, went to Walla Walla University for a little bit. I was doing biology there, went there for a quarter and then came back, switched my majors, and I took two quarters off, took about a year off, was trying to figure out what to do. And I landed at Seattle University for law. But that was kind of a big time in my life where I was just kind of like asking God, like, lead me, like, where do you want me to be? There was even about a month where literally I went to, when I was finished in Oregon through Arise, I actually drove my car all the way to California because I thought I was going to La Sierra. I signed up, I had the dorm ready, I was ready to go. I had a buddy actually that I saw 2 weeks ago. he reminded me that when classes started last year, they actually called my name out in the class because they thought I would be there, but I wasn't there. So I was kind of just trying to figure out where, where do you need me to be, God? And I ended up back at CLU because God did answer my prayer eventually. But during that time of the unknown, yeah, I was just kind of like, where do I need to be, God? And then also another thing too, just like I think there was definitely a time in my life where I asked God, I was like, Lord, like, as goes for studying, as well as for relationships. And I was before I met Sabbath, but there's definitely, I think, a time where you're asking God, right? When regards to a relationship, with regards to finding someone to date, and that whole idea of a future, like, Lord, like, what's next? What's next? And there's definitely, nothing for a while there, but in the sense of trying to figure out all these different avenues in your life. But I think at the end of the day, to answer the question, did it make me doubt God? How did it affect my relationship? I think it definitely, I think sometimes did. I think there's definitely during the mix.
You're supposed to be the example that comes on here and tells
I
everyone
know,
you did
right?
everything
But
perfect.
I know, right? But no, I think there was definitely actually a time in my life where I did feel a little tested. I was kind of like, God, what's going on? Like, and yeah, so but you kind of, wrestle with it. You pray, you try to journal. Journaling helped me a lot, trying to get through that, hang out with good people. But yeah, I think there was definitely times where you kind of doubt the direction that God's taking you. But at the end of the day, everything worked out. But during that kind of those years, right, where it was kind of the unknown, yeah.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? Just to try and be faithful in the silence, to try and be faithful in the unknown, in the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And God really just challenges us. I fully resonate with that. Sabbath, James, are there any experiences where you've resonated with Michael's story of having to deal with uncertainty, silence? Did you act faithfully in the silence and the uncertainty?
I can relate to Michael with the whole school thing and the relationships. And then I also dealt with that with like my aunt being sick. But I think at the end, I just saw how God works and like how everything made sense, like how I was where I was supposed to be and how that's the way that it should have been. But during the time, like, I think I didn't realize that. And like maybe I might have doubted or had like second thoughts, but looking back, like I see like everything is perfectly the way it should be.
James, you've never doubted before. You're a perfect Christian, aren't you?
No, yeah, I really appreciate the input, Michael and Saba. In high school, because of a series of events, just traumatic things and family disrupted and all that, I fell into some deep depression, and it was one of those things, like literally like a veil that just covers your life, and you don't know, it just comes, and you don't know how to get out of it. And yet it's very subtle because it affects everything, your motivation, your hope. And I would pray and ask God, can you just lift this up? Can you just get me out of here? And he didn't answer for the next 4 years. Looking back, I'm still thankful for the experience, not because of the suffering aspect of it, but because it taught me patience, and that sometimes God doesn't answer Ant's questions or your requests right away. But little did I realize, only in retrospect do I realize that he was growing me. He was strengthening my faith. He was growing my faith. I just didn't see it at that time. But I've been doing a little bit of COVID gardening lately, and it's amazing.
I like how you termed it there.
I've been trying to grow a sunflower. I put 10 seeds in, and oh my gosh, every single animal on the face of this earth love sunflowers. So out of those 10, only one survived, and with scars with that. But it survived, and every week I look at it, and oh my gosh, it's grown like 6 inches. I never saw it grow. But I think that's very apropos to our lives, our journeys, our spiritual lives, if you will.
Mm,
that God is always working within us and we are growing. We just may not see it. But that experience taught me patience and to
mm,
just continue to trust that God's going to come through. And he did.
definitely. Definitely, definitely. I think that's the perfect segue that you've just given me. I'm going to jump on that, James, of your sunflower analogy, which leads us into the next part of the story where we deal with Samson's parents. The deliverer is about to be born. God is about to smile upon Israel and hear their prayer after years and years and years of silence. And finally, a Jesus-like individual is about to be born unto Israel. So everyone's going to be happy. Everyone's going to be excited. An angel comes to visit his parents and tells of the news, much like an angel came to visit Mary and tell of the news and prepare them and give them specific instructions as to how best to raise this child in order that they can be in the most optimum way to save the people of Israel. My next question kind of centered, really starting off at James, actually. And I love the whole sunflower analogy because I think it really does fit into a lot of things. What responsibility was given to the parents of Samson? And I'm going to add to that is, do you think that the responsibility was too much? As it was given to them. Now, first, I'm asking James the question, but I am going to give a chance for myself and Michael and Sabbath to responses as people who aren't parents, because I think we'll offer a different spin on it. But I'm going to start with you, Mr. Sunflower. Off you go.
Okay. So yeah, I think they were given a great responsibility is the short and sweet answer. And I think though, they stood up to the challenge because of, I remember reading that his name was Manoah. By the way, Manoah sounds like such a Pacific Islander name. Manoah
Is
from
it?
Samoa, you know.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
that
yeah. I see
name.
it now.
Anyway,
I see it now.
I should have named my son Manoah, but
Okay.
that would be great.
Let's hope he's not listening. Anyway, carry
I'm
on.
sorry. But I remember Manoah said after that he heard his wife have the message from the angel, like, "Oh, you're gonna raise him this way and this way, no
Mhm,
alcohol and Nazarite, like strict
mhm.
vows, right?" Manoah was like, wait. Could you please repeat that again? Because
Right.
I really want to make sure I get this right.
Mhm,
That response tells me, wow, they were up for this challenge. I mean, they may not have felt like they were up to it, but just the
mhm.
fact that they really wanted to get this right tells me that, oh wow, they know what it takes. They understand the gravity. I remember gravity at the east side. No, no, the importance of their parental responsibilities. And of course, my when my sons, as they grow older, uh, they have free will, and the older they get, the more I back off and give
Mhm.
them their independence and respect it. But of course, that's hard. But um, gosh, just lost my train of thought. But
Okay.
um,
You're talking about the
and oh, that's
difficulty
right,
of
that's right.
giving the
And so,
responsibility. Go on.
yes, yes, yes. And of course, there's a lot of factors where, I, no matter what I do,
Mm,
how responsible I am, my sons might become these rebellious, rebellious dudes. I have two sons, who
mhm,
mock God, and maybe they become atheists.
mhm,
So of course, it's not all within the responsibility of the parents, but still, there's a great responsibility. The other thing I have to add is, so I'm a family doctor. I work up in Everett, so I kind of have to. I always like to think some of the what are the health or scientific aspects of this. By the
mhm,
way, I never thought about this, but that Nazarite vow that Samson took, that John the Baptist took, and in some ways
mhm,
you could say Jesus took. Um, it's where no alcohol, and here
mhm,
you see the parents, especially the mom, wasn't supposed to drink. Boy, this was like thousands of years ago. And did you know that it was at our University of Washington Medical School um, that they invented fetal alcohol syndrome? So fetal alcohol syndrome is where a alcoholic mom, because of the alcohol that is a
mm,
toxin to the fetus, the growing baby, um, create some damage. IQ, social, developmental changes. They're often very small. I had a classmate in 6th grade who had fetal alcohol syndrome, and all the kids made fun of him, and it was heartbreaking to see. But they invented that in 1973 or something like that. And like, I'm just impressed. Wow, this is thousands of years ago. And in the Bible, it talks about, oh, hey, as a mom, please don't drink alcohol for your son or daughter's sake. I'm like, wow, that's just ahead of the time, and that's just God-given wisdom there. But in any case, yes, a high responsibility for the parents.
100%. When I reflected on this story and I read the words of Ellen White, I have to be honest and say that the way that Ellen White brings it across, it made me feel almost nervous at the thought of being a parent, because hearing what you said, James, about, was it fetal alcohol or whatever you said, even just hearing those words really just echoes the responsibility even more. And Ellen White goes to the further degree to suggest that this boy is going to grow up to be a great person who will change the face of history. And it kind of depends on how you parent this child that will make all the difference. And as I read that, I thought to myself, is this just a call for Samson? Or is this a call for all of us in the here and now? That was the question that I wrestled with. And I asked myself the question because I wondered to myself, I wonder if we are also called to be those special representatives in some sense. Do I think that his parents were given a really strong and difficult calling? Yes, I do, actually. I think it was really hard. I think they were singled out and definitely given this responsibility. And I think that God likewise does the same for us as well, singles us out to be light bearers for this world. And in that is the ultimate question of how seriously do we want to take the responsibility of what God has placed on us. The influence that we have on other people is more than we think it is. And I think that's something that's definitely been reminded to me as I read this story. Samson had no choice on how his childhood would be designed and curated, but his parents did. And I think it's important to know that any parent or anyone who's thinking about becoming a parent, at least in the future, needs to understand the grave responsibility of their child will potentially change the face of history of humanity in some way, fashion, or form. And sometimes it's easy because of the billions of people that we have, we forget the implications of bringing children into this world and who they can be. I don't think, when I'll take an example, when I don't think when Mandela was born, that his mother could see into the future and knew exactly where Mandela was going to be and what he was going to do, or Martin Luther King, or you fill a blank with whoever you want to fill in. But I don't think any of their mothers and fathers could see that far into the future. But I do think that they took their responsibility seriously enough to know that their child needs to be prepared to change the face of history for future generations to come. And that's an attitude that needs to be chosen by parents. And it's an attitude that I was reminded of when I read this story. Michael and Saba, any thoughts? Do you think it was an easy task that was given to their parents? Do you think too much responsibility was given to them?
Yeah, I was reading it. I thought it was really fascinating how the lifestyle of the parents prior to the birth of Samson was called to change, right? Like his mom, and specifically kind of leading an example for Samson. And the whole idea just kind of reminded me, because when I was reading it too, I was like, wow, like Ellen White's she's going in here about like the expectations.
She doesn't mince her words.
No, she doesn't. Like, I was like, the implications of like how an action whether it be drinking alcohol or how we live as parents, right? One day, you know, as parents, when raising a kid, obviously, right, the example that you have in the home has implications, but even the fact of what you do when the baby's in the womb, right, and how you live your life, and perhaps the things you're eating and drinking and doing. And yeah, just like James said, which is awesome, how it's amazing how history in the past, we can see that God brought these things out, but in the future, now we know, right, that God knows, right? It's amazing. But yeah, I was just kind of shocked. I think just, looking into the details of how really it is important. It reminded me of that, how as parents, we really need to be examples for our kids. But I do think it was a big thing to bear for the parents. And not only that, I think when Samson was born, like making sure that he's walking in those same, attributes, and like he is following specifically because this is what God has called you to be, and you will be, a deliverer. And it just kind of reminded me of all the times in the Bible where God raised up people as well, right? Like Moses or Joseph. But I mean, specifically with Samson, it was more like this was his lifestyle, couldn't cut his hair, had to do these specific things, which I think, definitely could be,
100%. Just before you come in, Saba, I'm going to read some of those words that Ellen White actually says, which really did strike me. Page 561562. As a result of the parental intemperance, children often lack physical strength and mental moral power. And then she goes on to talk about liquor drinkers and tobacco, and she goes on to even talk about some of the physiological effects of inflamed blood and irritable nerves of children, etc., etc., etc. And it really just challenged me on the notion of there is stuff that I know that I shouldn't do, and yet I do them because I want to do them. But I'll leave that at that. Saba, any thoughts you wanted to chime in?
I was just going to say I agree. I think they had a really big responsibility. And like Michael said, I like how Ellen White emphasized that obviously, like being healthy and raising your kids is important, but that starts before birth, because everything you do affects your child and how they develop and everything. And what I liked was that she mentioned that how the body should serve the mind and not the mind the body, which makes sense, because once your body is healthy and happy and healed, like everything else just falls into place, whether it's your relationship with God or just health problems. So yeah, I think it was a big responsibility though. Yeah,
100%. But I think we can conclude. I hope you agree with me that his parents did a pretty decent job, right? I think from what we get from the story, they really did a pretty decent job. So let's move on to the next part of the story, where Samson decides to go and take a Canaanite wife. And to quote him, he did what pleased him. That's essentially the quote from scripture, from the story that Ellen White was commentating on. Here's the question. Despite the godly parents who did their best, Samson chose his own path in taking what, let's quote Samson, pleased him. Okay. What do we do with the things that we greatly desire that are contrary to God's direction? I think this is an important question to ask, is because the one of the reasons why I feel it's so important to ask this question is because I don't think we can eradicate the things necessarily that we immediately desire, that we know are contrary to God's plan. So I'm asking the question, what do we do with them? Is my question. Does anyone want to give a shot at moving off on that question? Anyone want to give their thoughts on that? What do we do with them? The things that we desire.
I think, just even based on my own life, I think there comes a time where you have to like discern a little bit about the things that you desire and whether or not those are coming from God, or just kind of where they're coming from, and the implications of them. So probably, just discernment. I think that's one thing, and just making sure, are these things that I'm inclined to do, or these pleasures that I want to seek, or these things that I want to, different characteristics of things that sometimes could come into your brain in life. Is this from God? And just discerning I guess, the steps to do next, right? And kind of,
Mhm.
I guess, through prayer and trying to figure out, is the next steps going down this path, is this going to be beneficial for me, right, in the long term?
Mhm.
So trying to look at the grand scheme of things, the actions, and what that would lead to. So just hearing
Yeah,
that.
I definitely hear you. Anyone else want to chime in? I have a thought that I want to say, but I'm going to give you guys the opportunity first. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be honest and say that there are many times in my life where I desire things that are totally contrary to God's will and purpose. Yeah, discernment is something that is required, but sometimes I don't even need the discernment because I already know. I already know because God has been clear with me and I'm clear with myself. And you know, the law of the new covenant says that his law is written on our hearts. I feel that every single day when I make a decision and I instinctively know that's wrong and that's wrong. I think one of the things that is important about this particular story of Samson is that he decided to choose to make a decision void of his community. And he made that decision by himself. And he later on came to his parents, asking them to essentially bless his already made decision, if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say. I think there is so much value in making healthy decision amongst community. And if we pull away from community for some of the most life-changing decisions, such as marriage, for instance, as one example, and we don't heed the counsel of our community and we make these decisions as solos, we get into very, very precarious territory. And I know that that's almost countercultural, especially because we live in an age where individualism is really praised amongst secular society. The idea of really holding on to things and being confident in who you are and moving forward as a solo individual is huge. But the people of God moved as the people of God, and God never called people to work as solo agents that didn't interact all around them. This is why I believe there is a huge power in the church. This is why I believe there is a huge power in the community of God's believers. The amount of times that I need to pull into that community, even as a pastor, when I just flesh out some of my ideas, it really is helpful to be able to gain perspective on the directions that I'm walking through in my life. And I believe that God uses the community of God to be able to express himself in that way. And I think it's something really important to know when it came to Samson choosing the path that pleased him, what to do with the desires that I have. I think one of the things that needs to be done with the desires that I have that are contrary to God's people, it's so important that you have a community to vocalize those desires. Now, I'm not saying that I need to stand up there and grab the mic, turn it on, and announce to everyone my inner thoughts, because I don't suggest that for anyone. What I am saying is that you need to have a close-knit group of people so that you work through some of those things, because if you internalize them and keep them to yourself totally, you will self-combust, and the devil knows that he has you there. And I personally am a firm believer in calling out the things that you know are contrary to God and calling out Satan, and allowing God to have power over the things that you vocalize against Satan. I think there's what to do about the things that I desire that are not of God is not to deal with it alone. And that would be one of my answers, which is so key. And one of the things that I don't think Samson had, we read about Samson, we don't read much about Samson being part of his community. He almost operates as a separate entity. So that would be my answer for that. Any thoughts? Anyone wants to chime in with that before we move on? Okay. as we continue on our discussion, if there's anyone else who wants to chime in who are on the Zoom call, you just need to let me know by unmuting yourself or writing a quick message, and I'll be happy to unmute yourself and you can make your comment. We're talking about the story of Samson. We've worked our way through his parents. We've gone to the point at which Samson now takes a wife. And then we get to the really uncomfortable story where essentially he is tricked by the Philistines, and then they eventually kill his wife, and they eventually killed his father-in-law. So here's my question. Do you think that Samson was justified in killing the Philistines that killed his wife and his father-in-law? Michael, I'm going to start the ball rolling with you. What do you think? Was he justified?
Yeah, I was kind of going back and forth a little bit because I feel him. I think the idea of, losing someone they love, seeing this group of people that they already had animosity towards, take it a step further, right? And do damage to someone that he loved. I get it. And I guess his strength as well. He's a strong guy, right? He was kind of aggressive. He was ready to go. He was amped up. He wasn't having it with, them being able to get away with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand, but then at the end of the day too, I don't know if it was clearly justified in the sense that he had a right to do that, to go over there and to unleash his anger. Yeah, so I would probably lean in the sense of understand of why he did it, but not in that it was okay or that it was justified. That's probably what I'm saying. But
you understand his emotions then. Yeah. James, do you think he was justified?
Oh boy, this is a tough question. I mean, for me, I think ultimately it comes to his motives, why he did it. Did God tell him to do it? Or did he do it out of his own rage and sense of vengeance?
Guys, am I wrong in suggesting that the Bible says the Spirit of the Lord came over him? Is that what the Bible says, I think?
Is that what it says for that?
I think it says the Spirit of the Lord came over him.
Really?
You can carry on, James. I'm going to get my Bible and confirm.
Well, in that case, I kind of can't argue against that.
Whoa!
but I still think that
Right.
the actions that he did on God's urging, if you will, or God's will, versus whatever it is in his heart, might be separate things, but just as Jesus taught, what's in your mind, what comes out of your mouth is what defiles you. What's out of your heart is what defiles you. So, and
it does say it. I confirmed it. It does say it. The Spirit of Lord.
If you want to get really technical, though, I mean, that was not technically his wife at that time.
Yeah,
she was married out to some. But,
it's true.
Boy, I didn't realize that Spirit of the Lord was upon him was there before, and
all right, I'm going to be controversial, and I'm going to say that he wasn't justified, despite the fact that the Spirit of the Lord came on him. I'm gonna propose that I don't think that the character of God is I don't think God is characterized by revenge. And I don't think revenge is something that is part of who he is. I do think that the essence of the Spirit of the Lord was upon Samson proposes that Samson was someone who was in relationship to God, with God, in spite of his actions. I recognize I'm walking on eggshells here. I know that I am. Because I'm desperately trying to be able to see what God is trying to do in this story and why, because it almost seems like God is condoning such violence in some respects. I don't think that this is a motif that we should be carrying forward in the future. However, touch my sister and we'll find out how Christian I am. And the reality is that's the essence of it, which I think Michael also talked about as well. I understand his emotion. I understand what he's like. We have other stories in the Bible who are like this. Yeah, if you're aware of the story of the Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat, just before all of those episodes take place, an enemy nation, one guy from an enemy nation rapes their sister Dinah. And then Simeon goes on a rampage and slaughters all of them. And I'm not going to go into the details because it's pretty grotesque how it happens. And I also asked the same question about Simeon. Was he justified in taking that revenge? I think God does understand the rage that we have. I'm going to defer back to my answer of saying, this is why it's so important to be a part of community again. I don't think I can handle the totality and the potency of my emotions as and when they happen as an individual. I need community in order to survive. I need community in order to help translate, synthesize, and calm me down when life gets really, really hard. I think one of the things that I definitely reap from this story is that, and I suffered from this so much, when life gets really, really hard, I have the tendency to close up and tell no one and go into my bubble. But the blessing of being able to make very difficult decisions, I go back again to my same old point, like a broken violin. I'm sorry to say this, that community is so important in order to be able to navigate the difficulties of life. That's my answer of what I think. In terms of the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him, I'm challenged by that. I'm not gonna say that it's not a hard one, and I don't have an actual answer for how do we reconcile the Spirit of the Lord being with Samson over that experience. Now, in saying that, I also recognize there's a huge challenge in this story, because God is seen in this narrative as essentially aiding Israelites to overthrow the Philistine enemies. And we eventually work towards that place where the Philistines do get destroyed under the leadership of God and via the hand of God. I'm uncomfortable with that, but I recognize that is something that is being done. Yeah, James, you wanted to add?
Well, I think Kosuke wanted to say something. I have something to add, but we'll defer.
Oh, he did. Oh, sorry, Kosuke. I wasn't looking. I'm gonna let you come in. Go for it.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Kosuke. I think you're muted.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah. Good morning.
Sorry, I jumped in the middle of the conversation. So I think that Pastor, you said briefly, but when Samson chose the Philistine woman as a wife, the Bible said that it came from God, right? So, and also, you didn't know that?
Making things more complicated for us, Kosuke.
I know. And that's, you know, the Judges chapter 14, verse 4.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
So interesting is that at that time, Philistines are actually oppressor of Jews, and God prepared Samson to, you know, relieve them, you know, actually free them from that oppression. So Samson had a son that Ro. Now you talk about the Shimeon and I think Shechem, what's a tribe name?
Shechem,
yeah, Shechem.
It was Shechem.
At that time that the Shechem and Jacob are in a good agreement. And they are not ready to be basically expelled from the land. The time has not come. So the situation is slightly different from this time. But at the same time, I would say that, as you said, Samson, personal revenge is not representing the God. And if he chose differently, I'm sure that the God had a better plan. But yet, I think that in the big picture, God knows what will come. And actually, Samson is always being inspired, and he has a capability to communicate with God because he's a Nazarite. So that even that when he killed that lion, the Bible said that the God's spirit on him. So whatever the action he takes, that the God's spirit is together with him. So I don't want
Costco,
to.
while you're on here, let me, if I might, I'm just going to push back a little bit because you mentioned verse 4. You mentioned verse 4, and I'll read it. It says, his father and mother did not know that this was from the Lord, for he was seeking a pretext to act against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. I'm wondering if there are several readings to this. The first reading is the notion that Samson chose a wife, which was not of the Lord. He made that decision, and God used that decision in order to be a part of his plan. The second notion is that God knew what he was doing and made sure Samson chose a wife of Philistine in order to affect his plan. Do you understand my two distinctions of how I look at those readings?
I'm not a native English speaker, so
okay.
I don't know how subtle it is, but yeah, can you repeat again?
Okay, so what I'm trying to say, and maybe James and Michael and Sabi, you can help me out. And what I'm trying to say, on one hand, we can view this as God is trying to overturn the Philistines by Samson choosing a wife. That's one instance. The second instance is Samson makes a wrong choice. And God uses that wrong choice. Do you see my differences there and how I mentioned it?
I think that Samson, it's Samson's free will to choose that woman, right? And that we cannot deny. God doesn't intend that or tempt people to make a sin. That's true. So I don't think that God encourages people to get intentionally that married with someone who do not honor God or worship God. I think that's against God's intention. But at the same time, as you said, along the line, it happens and God knows about it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you very much, Gosko. Appreciate that. It's a really, really challenging concept, guys. Like, just also as we get into the whole idea of making healthy choices in this life for God, there are many instances where people of God, men and women of God, have made some really dodgy choices within their free will, and yet God still uses them for great things. I'm sure Michael, Sabbath, James, you can resonate with dodgy choices that you have made in your life, and somehow God has worked through them. Am I fair in saying that? Yeah, I think God has done that for all of us. Let's try and move on in the story, see if we can get some headway as our time is against us. So he eventually kills those Philistines that have killed his ex-wife. Thanks for the clarification, James. As he moves on in the story, he eventually meets the love of his life, the story that we all talk about constantly when we come to the story of Samson, the story of Samson and Delilah. And songs have been written about this on many instances. And I think the main thing that we tend to hear is make sure you don't find Delilahs, boys and girls. So we get to the story of Delilah, and as we get to this really interesting story, Samson is there in this instance, defined very much by his strength, and he hides that from Delilah. He hides the source of where that comes from, which is his hair in essence. And we know the story, Delilah cuts his hair and the Philistines end up capturing him. My question is to the wider part of the narrative. What was the source of Samson's strength? And what is the source of our strength? And what is the charge upon Samson? And what is the charge on us as well? So that's the question. I'll read it one more time. What's the source of Samson's strength? What's the source of our strength? And what is the charge upon Samson? And what is the charge upon us? Saba, do you have any thoughts on that question? Does anything strike out to you when I ask those questions?
I think the source of Samson's strength was from God.
Mm.
And I feel like that's where we get our strength from as well, too. As far as I don't know what you mean by the charge question. Can you clarify that?
So what do you think God is asking us? Asking of us is the question. As a result of, when we answer the question, what's the source of our strength? Because I'm assuming that you're saying God is the source of our strength. So what therefore does that mean for us is the question. If you still need time to think, that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think for me, when I was looking at this, it's funny because you look at this story, right? You can just imagine that maybe the hair is the source of the power, because you strip the hair and then he loses the strength. We had a discussion about that last night too. It's just about like, you know, it's funny because it says the Lord left him right after the hair is cut. It's like, oh wow, that's it. Just cut the hair. The Lord leaves him. But looking at the story, right, like how Ellen White talks about it, how the hair wasn't the power source, but God was the power source. And that the hair was almost like this sign of showing his commitment to God, and him following God and that covenant, that promise that was made from birth. And yeah, so I just thought it's interesting how the hair was representation of that. And then as for the question of the charge, I think, so basically you're asking like, what does that mean to us, right?
Yes, essentially.
So I think, yeah, I mean,
I think that you need to start shaving your head.
You know, I might as well start doing the full lower fade, you know, all the way around. No, I think it's just once again kind of reaffirming how that relationship with you and God, and the importance of the commitment, or I guess, yeah, maybe just reminder of the importance of following God and the promises that we make to God, and what God has done for us. I think it's just interesting in the story of Samson too, how, you know, he struggled, like just looking through his life, like he had this huge calling on his life and he had massive highs and lows. I think Ellen White even mentioned, did she mention that like he like drank wine, like he was into drinking wine as well?
Yeah, he was pretty much an alcoholic in my estimation. Pretty much.
Which was funny to me because it's like from the moment he was born, right? He wasn't drinking.
I mean, he shouldn't have been, let's just say he shouldn't have been found in the vineyard. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, exactly. So he was meeting up with like going and seeing prostitutes in the vineyards. And it was just all this kind of, he was involved in this life.
Truly a man of God. Anyway.
But you know, he had the hair at that time, and he still had this promise, right? This covenant promise, this promise that he was going to be this person, this Nazarite. But it's just kind of saddened me too, though, obviously, to see the end of it. Like his eyes gouged out and all that happens to him. But yeah, it just reminded me of that promises that we have with God and the importance of that relationship with him.
Yeah. James, did any of that resonate with you, what Michael and Sabbath shared?
I think Michael Sabbath hit it on the nail. You know, if I wasn't raised up in this church, I would have hoped that I met Mrs. White, her readings, but I'm just going to read her quote because it's so, there was no virtue in his long hair merely, but it was a token of his loyalty to God, a token of his loyalty. I love that. Yeah, there's nothing with his hair that was magical. And the way I apply this is there's nothing magical in me going to church or participating in this forum right now, or reading the Bible or praying. But when I see it as they are tokens of my loyalty and trust in God, wow, that just changes it. In other words, Samson thought, oh yeah, it's because of me, you know, my muscles and my sinews, and that I'm strong. But maybe he thought it was him at some point, and he boasted, and maybe he thought full of himself, but then he lost that trust, that and reliance, that dependence on God, that it wasn't from him. It's all from God. You know, all the talents, gifts, and the strength, the wisdom we have, it's all from God. And the moment we lose sight of that, we lose this token of our loyalty to God. Yeah.
Definitely. Sorry, guys, I am getting just Some technical difficulties here. I cannot see anyone. Can everyone see me?
Yeah, we can see you really well.
Okay, great. I'm going to carry on regardless of the fact that I'm getting some tech difficulties over here. I think that definitely there is a lot of instances where God is trying his best to invite us into the space of understanding the difference between him and his tokens, him and his means, him and his ways, in order to try and help us understand how he wants to try and affect change in our lives. The losing of Samson's hair made me wonder to myself, are there things in my life that I have lost which act as contrary to the promises that I have made to him? And that's a question that I think we can only ask individually in some respect.
Can I say something?
Yes, sure. Oh, I've just found the screen. Thank you.
Sorry.
Go for it, Costco.
Yeah. Okay. So what impressed me especially about Samson is how his life is so outrageous, so self-minded, and pursuing his desire and emotions, and all the especially, I don't know, the relationship desire, or with a woman and so forth, but yet God used him for the purpose. And that's a most impressive part for me. So in a sense that, as James said, yes, we are always at the risk that who is source of life, and who is actually that giving us life and all the blessings, and it's easy, especially when you are in a good situation. Especially Samson ruled at the 20 years Israelites, which means that during that time probably he's just like probably respected by Israelites, and did whatever he want, and like a king maybe. But still that Samson didn't forget about God. Actually, Samson knew it came from God, and so that's a kind of a blessing, and also the encouragement to me.
Amen. Thank you for sharing. You've given us a perfect segue, Koske, into the final question that we have for us here on this panel discussion. We have about 4 minutes left, and it's not to rush any of you right now, but I'm gonna ask the final question as we reflect on the whole story. We know that Samson eventually gets captured by the Philistines. They pluck out his eyes, they put him on a mill, they end up working him, and he ends up basically rotting away in a cell, and secretly his hair is growing. Not secretly, but they forget that his hair is growing. As he grows, he gets more strength. He comes up to the pillars, he knocks the pillars down, they fall down, and the Philistines are crushed as a result of that, along with Samson. My question is, Samson in this story was physically the strongest man on earth, but comparatively the weakest man on earth. I'm using Ellen White's words here. And the final question is, what can we learn from this story and that dynamic? Michael, I'm going to give you the opportunity to start us off. We'll go to Sabbath, and then we'll go to James and myself.
Yeah, no, I thought this was really fascinating, because a lot of the times we look at people, right? And they might be super strong looking, they might be, espousing confidence perhaps in a certain way, where you look at them and like, wow, like this person's strong, this person knows what he wants, this person knows what he's doing. You just imagine Samson walking around, right? Like this huge guy, like able to just rip people apart, tear down a lion, like, you think he has it all together. But in actuality, like he really struggled in controlling his emotions, his passions. He lacked in self-control. It was just a big reminder to me of really what happens on the inside, on how you're able to isolate and control different things that you're feeling and emotions, and be able to balance that and not let things go astray. is a true example of being a strong man. I just thought that it was an interesting way. I've never seen it before in the story, actually. Thought about that way of looking at Samson and how he let basically himself go. And though he was strong physically, he was pretty strong or pretty weak mentally. So I was seeing that difference, and then it just kind of reminded me of the importance of that.
Yeah.
Definitely. Sabbath?
Yeah, going off of that, like obviously like he was big and strong and mighty and all that, but when you think about him, like he was really like he never practiced self-control or anything. I think he acted on certain things without even thinking, and it came from emotions rather than like deep processing. I think that it's important that like with having desires that may like not be godlike or bring you closer to God, that even if you have desires, that you practice self-control, and that you take the time to think with your head and not just make rash decisions or just do things out of passion.
Well said. James?
Yeah, I'm on the same wavelength. I love collecting quotes. I just gonna read this one quote. The real greatness of a man, and I'm gonna just change that to person, modernize Mrs. White here. The real greatness of a person is measured by the power of the feelings that he or she controls, not by those that control him or her. Oh, I love that. And if I could just paraphrase that, the biggest lesson that I'll take away from this for the rest of my life is, does life control you, or does God control your life? Does life control you, or does God control your life? Or do you allow God to control your life? And I'll never forget this message from the story of Samson. Very, very powerful.
Well, I'm certainly not going to mess up that last comment by saying something. I think you brought it nicely to an end, James. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much to Michael and Sabbath also being part of this discussion. It was really great to have this conversation with you. To those who are listening in, to those who are online, thanks for joining us for this episode on Patriarchs and Prophets, chapter 54. Next week, we will be diving in to chapter 55, to the best chapter in the world, the child of Samuel. I have no idea why that's the best chapter. I've got no idea. It might be because it's about someone named Sam. But anyway, we want to invite you back to next week's episode of Patriarchs and Prophets. We want to encourage you to read in the week, to have your discussions. Come online onto Zoom, and you'll be free to be able to make your comments, or jump onto the YouTube link to make your comments and watch there. And we want to wish you an amazing Sabbath. Before we do go, I am going to pray. I want to remind you that we do have our hybrid church commencing at 11:15 a.m. Please, you are very welcome to come and join us. We have lunch provided. And yeah, we would love to be able to do that. Please do sign up if you are coming. It just helps us out because of the COVID regulations. eastsidesda.org. So let's end with prayer, shall we? Father, I want to thank you so much for the story of Samson, the highs, the lows, and the ambivalent areas all resonate to the aspects of our lives that we come into contact with on a regular basis. Will you teach us to be able to control the emotions that have been blessed within us, to help us feel and work through? May your spirit be the leader and not our minds be the leader of those things. We want to thank you that you've blessed this conversation, and all those who have been listening and who will listen to this in the future, may also their hearts be blessed as well. We thank you for being our God, and we love you very much in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us.